Well, labor unions are pushing back against President Joe Biden's executive orders that would mandate vaccines for more than 2/3 of working Americans. The American Federation of Government Employees, which represents 700,000 federal and Washington, D.C. government workers, issued a statement saying changes like this should be negotiated with our bargaining units and that we expect to bargain over this change before implementation. Biden's executive orders come despite the president previously saying that he would not mandate vaccines. Now, Jen Psaki was asked to explain why Biden's thinking on the matter changed. Let's take a look at that.
I know he said that back in December or January, so 8-9 months ago. And I've touched on a couple of the components that we feel have changed a bit. One is that we didn't anticipate, once the vaccine was readily, widely available and free to the public across the country, anyone who wants a vaccine has been able to get one for months, that there would be such opposition to it, especially given it was approved under the former president, a Republican president. The second piece of this is that we also anticipated, or maybe we didn't anticipate, but we knew that a number of people were waiting for FDA approval to get the vaccine. That they said that once it's approved by the FDA, that's what I'm really waiting for. There were more people who were vaccinated in August than July, but there are still 80 million people who are not vaccinated.
We're joined now by somebody who is there in that room asking some of these questions. White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegman. Welcome, Philip.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So now Psaki has gotten a lot of tough questions in recent weeks about the administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan. This seems to be such a black and white flip-flop that you would expect a lot of journalists to have a lot of really tough questions about it as the week goes on. There are so many different questions here, the constitutionality of it, the enforcement of it, the labor union layer that we just mentioned. So, Philip, do you expect to get it, that Jen Psaki will get a lot of questions and a lot of tough questions about this week?
Well, the White House was really smart about this rollout. They announced the policy on a Thursday. The first time we got a chance to ask anyone in the administration questions on camera was on Friday. They moved that briefing from 1 to 2 to 3. And so at 3 o'clock in the afternoon last week, we finally got to ask some questions. The press secretary was asked numerous times about the constitutionality. A lot of my colleagues wanted to know why the federal government hadn't picked up the stick earlier, but plenty of people in that room were asking about the OSHA component here. And eventually, I think at the fourth or fifth question, Jen Psaki just ended up reading the statute that created OSHA from the 1970s. I think that they will continue to get questions about this. But right now, it's going to take time for the Department of Labor to create a rule, then it's going to take time for implementation. Clearly, what's going on right now is that the administration is floating this as something that is going to happen. And the thought is, let's see how many people we can get vaccinated before some of these penalties actually come online. And this also has the side benefit of distracting from the fact that Afghanistan is still very much in hell in that handbasket.
Seems like such an odd distraction to move to, though, something that's so, that feels really unpopular. And the fact that, Jen Psaki, what really stood out to me was she said, well, we just thought everybody would do it. And we ended up with all this opposition. So now we have to force people into doing it. It just seems so, it's incredible that we aren't seeing more pushback from the media. But of course, one thing we should probably point out is a lot of the news media, a lot of their advertisement comes from big pharmaceutical companies.
Well, it's interesting that the first part of that answer was that, well, this was developed under a Republican administration. We thought that more people would do this voluntarily. Well, once they didn't do it voluntarily, that's when we decided to, use sort of the compulsion aspect here. Look, I think that, with about 75% of American adults having taken one dose, that's an incredible success story. I think that, moving away from the incentive route and actually picking up the stick with some of these penalties, we're going to see whether or not that gets a large portion of the 80 million Americans who are completely unvaccinated to actually show up and roll up their sleeves and get vaccinated, or whether or not that's just going to harden them in their resolve.
And Philip, whatever you people think of the mandate, the question of its politics and its popularity is still an interesting one. Does the White House think that this is ultimately a winner? Because as you said, 70+% of people have taken at least one shot. So is this an issue where it feels like the country's 50-50 if you watch cable news, but actually it's more like 70-30, 75-25 here. In other words, does the White House feel like they have the political upper hand here?
That's a really good point, because there's polling that shows that a lot of folks are very pro-vaccine, because we've all been living through this pandemic moment. We've been promised that the vaccine is going to be the way to get out of this era. I think that a lot of people certainly are in favor of taking the vaccine voluntarily. We're going to find out if moving away from the sort of persuasion route actually does turn people. And I think it's interesting right now to see labor unions. We mentioned those at the beginning of the segment. And surprise, surprise, Joe Biden, who said that he was going to be the most pro-union president ever, ended up siding with big capital over unions. And now you have these unions who are frustrated because they didn't get an opportunity to negotiate over agency, over the what's in the well-being of their members. Now their members, just like everybody else, are sort of going to be forced to comply with this mandate with extra steps to undergo a medical procedure, right? Like, vaccines are good. That part of the debate seems to be settled. But remember here what's going on. I mean, you have the CEO of Delta Airlines, praising the administration for the steps that they have taken. And you have Delta working with the blessing of government to threaten to garnish the wages of their own workforce if they don't get vaccinated. Delta loves this because their CEO was pointing out that the vaccine is free, but it costs us about $50,000 to put someone in the hospital and get them back on their feet. Delta loves this because Delta doesn't have to worry about getting their workforce vaccinated. Delta doesn't really have to worry about those problems. We're smaller workforces, though. They're already facing a workforce shortage. It's going to be much more difficult for them. And big business, of course, big business loves this. Well, big business loves big government.
And to your point, the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable on Friday both came out in favor of Biden's move. And it's, I think, also another good example of how Democrats take minority voters for granted, because they do make up a significant portion of people who are skeptical of the vaccine. And before we move on, I'll just quickly add, Republicans feel galvanized by this. They had to spring in their step on Friday. They think that this is, to Ryan's question, going to be politically a winner for them. The mandate is going to be a political winner for them. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there's a lot of nuance here, and the distinction between the mandate and the voluntary taking of the vaccine is an important one. But I think Republicans may have gotten a little over their skis, or ahead of their skis on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it will have to do with how the pandemic plays out from here. If it actually wanes and peters out and a lot of the restrictions are lifted by a year from now, then I think people will look back and say, well, that was genius. That was great. If Lambda and Mu and all these others come in and rip us apart and the pandemic continues, then actually that probably kind of washes out any effect of it anyway and pushes them so far underwater that it doesn't even matter. I don't know, Kim, what's your take?
Well, we do. I want to go ahead and play this clip here. We've got Congressman Peter Meijer. He blasted the executive order saying that this was outrageous overreach. I agree with him. Let's go ahead and hear this.
The President of the United States using an administrative rule to implement such a far-reaching policy that would impact over 100 million Americans is grossly overstepping that authority.
That's a good point.
Although, I do think, and to Philip's point, that the labor unions have a really good argument that they ought to be able to at least negotiate the terms of this.
But that's why there's a conservative case for collective bargaining, is because you can do this on that level without government intervention. You actually reduce the need for government intervention. Philip Biden, actually, I think his campaign announcement was at like the AFL Hall in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
How do you think this affects his relationship with the labor movement?
Well, I'm not certain if this is going to actually cause him much trouble. Union sector voters, those have been shrinking over time. I think that, the bigger problem here is the one that's going to be on the horizon when we eventually see some of these vaccines be approved for kids, because we're going to have the same type of debate. And the question is going to be, is this going to be one that is settled through incentives where if your child is vaccinated, they don't have to wear the mask? Or is this just going to be through sort of a heavy-handed approach. And Representative Meyer isn't the only one who's frustrated here. A lot of governors are frustrated because they took Biden at his word in January when he said that a mandate wasn't coming. They listened to the CDC director in July when she said that a mandate wasn't coming. And a case in point example here is Governor Asa Hutchinson from deep red Arkansas, who worked with the administration, who's on the phone daily with Jeff Zients, trying to figure out how to get his constituents to take this seriously, to get vaccinated. And they had success the voluntary route. Now they feel whiplash, and now they have to go back to the folks who either because they procrastinated or because they were very hesitant about the vaccine. Now they have to go back to them and say, yeah, we told you all those things about how this was in your best interest. Well, now it's still in your best interest, but there are consequences. You need to obey and do this. And I think that if we've been surprised by the division over vaccines for adults, it's only going to get supercharged when it comes to kids.
Well, over the weekend, one of Pfizer's board members, also the former FDA commissioner, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, said you could expect to see vaccines ready for children come Halloween.
I think in a best case scenario, given that timeline that I've just laid out, you could potentially have a vaccine available to children aged 5 to 11 by Halloween. If everything goes well, if the Pfizer data package is in order, and FDA ultimately makes a positive determination. I have confidence in Pfizer in terms of the data that they've collected, but this is really up to the Food and Drug Administration to make an objective determination.
Oh, he has confidence in Pfizer. That's shocking. So, Philip, do you expect, so Scott Gottlieb is the former FDA commissioner, not the current FDA commissioner. Do you expect that the administration will sort of echo and parrot that messaging? Is that similar to the plan that you think they have right now as well?
Well, there is no current FDA commissioner because Biden hasn't appointed one for confirmation. Yeah, I think that Gottlieb probably has a better idea of these types of vaccine timetables. Clearly, this is something that would be good. I mean, vaccines are inherently good things. We've seen tremendous success in adults. And if this isn't rushed, it doesn't seem like it is. If that timeline is followed, then, parents are going to be thinking, well, can we get back to normal? And that's the question here. Is this going to be one where you have parents making this decision, or is someone else going to be making decisions in their place? And sort of, who is the one who decides, right? Is it going to be the federal government from on high saying all 50 states have to do the same thing? Or is it going to be, individual state legislatures or individual school boards making that determination? And so far, what we've seen from the administration is that, they've picked up the stick. They're happy to use that when it comes to adults. We'll see what they do when it comes to kids once this vaccine is finally approved.
Well, thanks so much, Philip, for your insights this morning.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
All right, coming up, more than 900 pages of materials related to U.S.-funded coronavirus research in China were released following an FOIA lawsuit by The Intercept. The reporter who dug through that information joins us next to explain what they found.